Time gradually moved on, and Maverick found himself settling comfortably into his role as a professor. Teaching the 6th years the major aspects of science had been more enjoyable than he expected, especially watching the teenagers become mesmerized by an entirely new world that had been right beside them all along. At the same time, the alchemy classes focused more on memorization, with the initial lessons centered on runes. Yet, despite the subject's early dull phase, the students displayed a surprising eagerness to learn, and some students like Neville Longbottom, Hermione Granger, and a few others displayed real potential in grasping the complexity of the language of runes, showing enough talent to become 2-star or even 3-star alchemists if they chose to pursue a career in it. Maverick even considered the idea of taking some of them on as apprentices. However, not right now, perhaps in a year or two, when they had matured more and if they still showed the same enthusiasm. Meanwhile, the buzz about his 2 classes stuck around for several days, spreading from students who had attended to those who hadn't, from juniors to seniors and vice versa. But like all gossip, it eventually began to fade. By the time the weekend approached, the whispers surrounding the name Professor Caesar had all but disappeared, replaced by discussions of other ongoing or upcoming events. Time passed slowly, and soon the first weekend arrived. It was now Saturday evening, and Maverick sat in one of the Hogwarts classrooms, accompanied by 3 others, with the desks arranged in a circle for what appeared to be a meeting. On one side sat Maverick and another man in formal wizarding attire, while Professor McGonagall and Madame Hooch sat across from them, with 4 empty chairs between them on either side. "Thank you for accepting the appointment, Mr. Stephen, on behalf of Hogwarts, the headmaster and myself," Professor McGonagall said kindly, smiling at the man, now identified as Stephen. He appeared to be in his 40s, with neatly trimmed black hair and a lean, strong build. "No, thank you, Professor," Stephen replied, smiling back at the deputy headmistress. "I've been feeling rather bored since I retired last year. That is, until my friend here came to visit me last month." "I see." McGonagall raised an eyebrow and glanced briefly at Maverick, then back at Stephen. "If you don't mind my asking, what were your plans after retiring from professional Quidditch?" "Honestly, I've had this idea for a while, even before my last year with the Bellicosal Bats," Stephen said thoughtfully. "I wanted to coach a team after my playing career ended. Then, when Maverick came to me last month and asked me to coach the Hogwarts team, I thought this would be a great start." He smiled. "Besides that, coaching the Quidditch team of the most prestigious magical school in the world would be a great honor for me." McGonagall nodded, a hint of pride in her expression. It was, after all, a compliment to her school. "What other superstar friends do you have, Professor Caesar?" Madame Hooch asked teasingly, glancing between the 2 men before settling her gaze on Maverick. "It's just Stephen here," Maverick chuckled. "And we've been friends for only about a year. Before that, I didn't even know he existed because, I'm not a fanatic fan of Quidditch." "That's right," Stephen added with a grin. "He came to my grandfather to tweak his broom, and that's how we met. He had a freaking king's broom of all things and wanted some custom work done on it. Honestly, I was skeptical at first. What young man could get his hands on one? I thought he might be some pretender, so I asked him to test his skills against mine." He chuckled again. "But then I was shown why he was a student of an archmagus because my 3-time world champion flying skills were toyed with by him. I've never seen someone maneuver in the air like that." Maverick smiled a little shyly but didn't deny it, simply shrugging. Then he noticed McGonagall and Hooch staring at him with wide eyes. "How in Merlin's name can you fly a king's broom?" McGonagall exclaimed. "Forget that. How did you even get one?" Madame Hooch added, equally astonished. Maverick remained calm, smiling faintly. He had decided to gradually reveal some of his abilities to McGonagall and Dumbledore, especially now that he was nearing the rank of Archmagus. Some of the things he might need to do in the future in front of them couldn't simply be explained by saying he was talented in pure magic control. "I have the license to fly it, and the broom itself was a gift from my teacher," he explained, then looked at McGonagall with a knowing smile. "Besides, you should know how skilled I am at magical energy manipulation." McGonagall didn't know what to say and simply nodded after a moment, recalling a few things. Madame Hooch, however, looked puzzled, glancing between the 2 for an explanation. "You know his teacher is Speaker Garling, and to him, it won't be much of a hassle to get one such broom," McGonagall said, and Hooch nodded in recognition. "And," she hesitated, not wanting to overstep by revealing things without Maverick's permission. But seeing his nonchalant smile that seemed to say he didn't mind, she continued. "He's exceptionally advanced in magical energy manipulation and magical sense." So, it's fair to say Professor Caesar can handle it. Madame Hooch blinked in disbelief, turning to Maverick. You're serious? So young? My goodness. He's not a great magus, McGonagall clarified quickly. Like I said, he's just extraordinarily talented at controlling pure magic. She turned to Maverick again but froze when she saw his faint smirk. You are, aren't you? She asked cautiously, her eyes wide, thinking that her mentor's earlier suspicion might in fact be true. Maverick studied her for a moment before chuckling. Does it matter? Anyway, we're not here to talk about me. He turned to Stephen, but then his gaze turned toward the door. It seems our guests have arrived. Right on cue, there was a knock at the door. Then with a wave of his hand, Maverick caused it to open. You can all come in. 8 teenagers in uniforms, 2 from each house, entered the room slowly after receiving permission. But the next second, one of them let out an excited yelp. Morgana's tits. Is that Mario, Stephen? The other students gasped as well, their eyes sparkling as if they were seeing a famous celebrity. And that was indeed the case. Mario Stephen was a well-known figure, being the captain of the Belicastle Bats Quidditch team, which had won the European Quidditch League over 20 times. Stephen himself had won it a few times and even triumphed in the World Championship 3 times with the Irish national team. So it wasn't an unexpected reaction from the children. Mr. Kaplan, that will be 20 points from Hufflepuff. Professor McGonagall's voice cut through the room like a train, barely a second after the curse slipped out. Honestly, I expected more from a Hufflepuff such as yourself. The boy in question, who had accidentally cursed out of excitement, immediately covered his mouth, as if he could somehow take back his words. Stephen didn't react much as he was now used to this kind of reaction from people, and Maverick just watched the little drama amusedly. All of you, please take your seats, as we still have dinner to attend, and I don't want our guests to starve by keeping this meeting lingering longer than it should. McGonagall gave her authoritative stare at the group of teenagers, causing them to hurriedly oblige and step toward the empty chairs. The 2 girls in the group, a Slytherin witch with a prefect badge and a Hufflepuff, quickly rushed forward, taking seats beside Maverick and Stephen, respectively. The others followed, all eager to avoid sitting next to Professor McGonagall. Unfortunately for the Hufflepuff boy who had cursed earlier, he ended up right beside her. Once they were settled, Maverick stepped in. Thank you all for taking the time to come to this. Let's call it an informal gathering. He smiled kindly, easing the tension in the room. As you've probably guessed, this meeting is about the inter-school Quidditch tournament kicking off in November. The 8 of you, each house's prefect and Quidditch team captain, have been chosen to assist us in team selection and, more importantly, to relay important information about the tournament from the organizers to your fellow students. Just then, the Slytherin witch sitting beside him raised her hand, eagerly looking slightly impatient. Maverick opened his mouth to acknowledge her, but Professor McGonagall's voice cut through like a whip. Put your hand down, Miss Farley. This is not a class. Listen first, and there will be ample time for questions afterward. The Slytherin witch dropped her hand immediately, her cheeks flushing, and Maverick gave her a reassuring nod before continuing. Now, as I was saying, this tournament will include 4 of Europe's most prestigious magical schools. It'll be structured in 3 rounds. The first in November, the second in next year February, and the championship in early May. It'll follow a league format. In the first round, each team will compete against every other team once. The top 3 teams with the most wins will advance, while the team with the fewest wins will be eliminated. If there's a tie in wins, we'll use total scores to determine rankings, and if even that ends in a tie, the team with the fewest fouls will be declared the winner. The second round will follow the same format, with the top 2 teams moving on to the final. Maverick paused, letting the students take in the information. This isn't just a one-time event. The school administrations, along with the other participating schools, have agreed to make this an annual tournament. Moreover, we expect the number of participating schools to increase, but we won't make it more than 6. The host school will rotate each year, chosen by a fair draw after this inaugural competition. He then gestured toward a sleek, crystal-like device placed a little further away from them. This tournament won't just be watched by those sitting in the stands at Hogwarts. It'll be broadcast live to all participating schools and key locations across the countries. This, he pointed to the device, is called Magic Vision. It's a new product my company is launching at the end of this month. Think of it as a magical version of Muggle television. It allows people to watch live events from anywhere, even across borders. His tone turned more serious as he looked at each of them in turn. This competition will have a lot of eyes on it. For those students dreaming of a career as professional players, this would be a great opportunity to shine. Scouts will be watching. Apart from that, we'll also have important guests in attendance, so I expect nothing but the best behavior from all the students. As leaders, it's your responsibility to ensure Hogwarts presents itself well. We can't afford any missteps in front of the world. He glanced at Stephen, who had been sitting quietly beside him. I'm sure you all know Mr. Mario Stephen, Maverick said, a hint of a smile returning. No introduction needed. He's agreed to coach the all-star team we'll be selecting for Hogwarts. Stephen nodded in acknowledgement, smiling at the students. We'll start trials next week, Maverick continued. The process will be structured. Basic skill assessments first. Speed, accuracy, reflexes, followed by mock matches to see how students perform under pressure. All will factor into the final selection. Stephen nodded as Maverick continued explaining. Once the team is chosen, they'll train under Coach Stephen's guidance to prepare for the tournament. This isn't just about winning. It's about representing Hogwarts on a global stage. I expect full dedication from every student who makes the team. He turned to the prefects. Your role is to ensure that every student interested in trying out knows about the trials. Any Hogwarts student can apply, even first years who aren't currently on a house team. Blood status is irrelevant. I don't care if they're Muggle-born or pureblood. Talent can come from anywhere, and we don't want to overlook anyone who could make a difference. Maverick glanced at Stephen. Steve, do you have anything to add? The Quidditch veteran shook his head. I think your explanation was clear. As for the training regimens and everything else, I'll speak directly to the team after the trials. Maverick nodded, then took a breath, softening his expression as he looked at the 8 teenagers. This is a big opportunity, not just for the school, not just for those who dream of playing Quidditch at the highest level, but for all of you as well. By being part of the organizing team, you'll gain valuable experience, something you can even add to your resume when looking for a job after school. He paused, considering an idea before adding, I can also hand over the financial management of the Hogwarts team to you. Procuring jerseys, broomsticks, and other necessities, if you're up for the challenge. My company will be sponsoring the tournament itself, so to keep things fair and avoid any accusations that might arise if we were to secure the win, it cannot also sponsor the Hogwarts team. However, I can connect you with businesses so you can take the lead in securing the best possible sponsor. This will be an excellent opportunity for you to gain hands-on experience in management. He glanced at Professor McGonagall, who was watching him with a satisfied smile. Of course, Professor McGonagall will supervise, ensuring everything runs smoothly. She has managed this school for decades, and her guidance would be invaluable to you. McGonagall nodded in agreement. She was the kind of witch who genuinely wanted the best for her students, and when it came to their benefit, she wouldn't hesitate to support them. Maverick watched as the students' expressions gradually shifted throughout his explanation, from curiosity to intrigue, then to genuine excitement, and couldn't help but smile in satisfaction. Let's make it count, he said, finally glancing around the room. Any questions so far? The discussion carried on longer than expected. Because of this, McGonagall arranged for dinner to be brought into the room and served during the discussion, coordinating with the house elves to make it happen. At first, the conversation revolved mostly around fangirling over Stephen, but fortunately, the man was patient and answered all students their questions. Needless to say, they were thrilled to have him as the school team's coach. Eventually, the talks shifted back to the tournament, with all the prefects, Quidditch team captain, and teachers sharing their opinions on how to ensure a fair selection process for the school team. Even Marcus Flint, the Slytherin team captain, behaved rather well during the conversation. In contrast to the arrogant and prejudiced image portrayed in the movies, he showed no objection to selecting players based on talent rather than blood status. Perhaps it was because he was a massive fan of Stephen and didn't want to make a bad impression, or maybe it was McGonagall's presence keeping him in check. Either way, Maverick didn't particularly care. Even if Flint was hiding his true thoughts, as long as he didn't cause trouble, that was all that mattered. The meeting concluded, finalizing most details, including the date for the trials, which were set for the following weekend. McGonagall agreed to make the schedules of the 8 students more flexible throughout the year, as long as they didn't slack off in their studies. By the end, everyone was satisfied. The prefects were eager and excited to take part in the organizing team. The Quidditch captains were thrilled about the tournament, looking forward to the team selection trials, and excited about being trained by a famous Quidditch superstar. The teachers were pleased with how smoothly everything had gone. Stephen then flew back to his home to return on the trials day, and everyone went back to their respective quarters to conclude the evening. Excitement buzzed through the halls of Hogwarts in the following week as more news about the inter-school Quidditch tournament, mentioned during the opening ceremony, began to spread across the school. Inside every common room, eager discussions about the upcoming trials filled the air. Students speculated about who would make the Hogwarts team, and the hype grew even stronger when they learned that the tournament would be watched by people from all over Europe. Every young witch or wizard who could fly a broom was tempted to try out, hoping for a chance to make the final team. Even the first years were eager to prove themselves. There were no restrictions on who could participate, as the notice on the official board clearly stated that anyone was welcome to join the trials. After all, what young child wouldn't want a shot at fame? Time flew by, and before anyone knew it, the next weekend arrived. Saturday mornings were usually quiet during breakfast in the Great Hall, as there were no classes. But today, the hall buzzed with infectious energy, as students chatted excitedly about the big event to be held right after breakfast. The trials were set to begin at 9:30, so by 9 o'clock, the Great Hall had mostly emptied as eager participants and spectators alike made their way to the open grass field outside the castle. The prefects took charge, organizing the students by their houses, and before long, nearly a third of the large lawn beside the school was filled. However, contrary to what they remembered about the grassy area, it was no longer just an open stretch of green. They looked up and saw numerous glowing hoops scattered across the field. Each hoop was marked with a number and emitted a faint green light. Some hoops hovered few meters above the ground, while others floated high in the air. It was only last evening that Maverick, along with Professor McGonagall, created the trial course based on Stephen's design, and for them, being elites in the art of transfiguration, bringing his vision to life was no trouble at all. "Are we supposed to ride broomsticks and fly through these hoops?" one student asked, looking up while tugging at his friend beside him. "The hoops are numbered, and look, hoop number 7 is only a meter above the ground. If you're not careful when coming down from hoop 6, you might crash," another student added, pointing out his observation. "Wait, there are even harder ones. After flying through hoop 11, you have to turn left immediately, or you'll miss hoop number 12, a third student exclaimed. While the students discussed and debated the best way to navigate the course, Maverick and his team of teachers also arrived at the area. He and Stephen were tasked with overseeing the students' talents, while McGonagall and Hooch were there to observe as school leaders. Madame Pomfrey was also present, needless to say, ready to assist in case of any accidents that might occur. "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us." Maverick couldn't help but chuckle as he glanced at the large crowd of students now looking their way, clearly talking about them. Stephen scanned the crowd and smiled. "They've got good energy. I'm sure there's talent here, given the numbers. Please keep things under control, both of you," Pomfrey muttered, eyeing Maverick sternly. "Don't make things too dangerous for the children, even if you and Minerva are sure to prevent any accidents. Just last week, I had one brought to the infirmary after a flying lesson." At her comment, McGonagall remembered the accident and asked, "How is Mr. Longbottom now?" "He's been discharged, but I'm worried something similar might happen again, especially with this many students," Madame Pomfrey said, her voice tinged with concern. "We'll keep our senses alert, Poppy. Besides, we have Mr. Stephen here and Professor Caesar as well, who is apparently even more skilled at flying. They'll be ready to take action at any time," McGonagall said in hopes of reassuring the worried-looking healer. "That reminds me," Maverick added, tilting his head. "I heard Mr. Potter showed some impressive flying skills for his first time." McGonagall sighed, shaking her head. She gestured toward the crowd. "He's over there, along with some of my other young lions. I suspected his friend would drag him here, but I wasn't expecting half of Gryffindor's first years to show up." Maverick chuckled. "Well, good for you, Professor. At least Gryffindor has a bigger talent pool." He then turned to Pomfrey. "Don't worry, Madame Pomfrey. We'll make sure the students stay safe." He glanced at Stephen, who gave a firm nod. "We'll do our best," Stephen assured. When the students' chatter quieted into hushed murmurs and finally stopped, Maverick took the lead, stepping forward, amplifying his voice, and he began to address the crowd. "Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I want to remind you all of something very important," he said, his voice carrying across the field. He looked at the crowd of expectant faces focused on him, his expression turning serious as he continued. "The purpose of this trial is not only about selecting the best among you at Quidditch for the school. It is more about setting aside your house rivalries and choosing a group that will represent Hogwarts as one team. The team will include students from all 4 houses, regardless of your status or your blood. So, I want you to leave aside any house conflicts or other disagreements you may have and think of yourselves as one group, representing one school. Because during the tournament, the eyes of all Wizarding Europe will be upon you, and they will see you only as students of Hogwarts, not as Gryffindors, Slytherins, or any other house. Just Hogwarts. The team chosen from among you will carry the weight of our school's reputation. So, I want you to take this seriously. Remember, this isn't just a game. Well, it is, but you know what I mean. A few students chuckled, but most nodded solemnly, understanding the meaning behind the words. Now, let's talk about how today will go, Maverick continued. First, I'd like to introduce someone who needs no introduction, though I'll give him one anyway. This is Mario Steven, 3-time Quidditch world champion, and your new coach for the Hogwarts All-Star team. The students erupted into applause and cheers, while Steven raised a hand in acknowledgement and flashed a smile at the crowd. Maverick continued, giving a moment for the excitement to settle. Today we'll be testing 3 key areas: flying skills, reflexes, and endurance. These are the foundations of any great Quidditch player, and we'll be putting you through your paces to see who's got what it takes. Only 14 of you will make the team: 2 keepers, 6 chasers, 4 beaters, and 2 seekers. 7 starters and 7 bench players, as per international rules. We won't be discriminating based on age, house, or anything else. The best will make the team, plain and simple. The students exchanged glances, some looking nervous, others determined. Today, we'll focus on endurance and flying skills, and by the end of the day, 28 of you will be selected, 4 for each position. Next weekend, we'll hold mock matches, where we'll randomly split the 28 players into 4 teams. Coach Steven, Professor McGonagall, and I will observe closely. Every move, every decision, every bit of effort you put in will count, and then we'll select the best 14 out of you. He finished the explanation, leaving the rest to be addressed next week for the selected players, and then focused on his storage ring. He pulled out a dozen or so flying brooms, handing one each to Steven, Hooch, and McGonagall, and placed the rest neatly arranged in front of him. Glancing back at the sea of eager students ready to begin, he offered a reassuring smile to ease the tension. Now, before we get started, let me explain the conditions to pass the trial. He gestured to the rings hovering above the ground. I'm sure many of you have already guessed the purpose of the numbered hoops in the sky, but let me explain anyway. Your objective is to start from the ring numbered 1 and fly through each ring in order, all the way to ring number 30, without skipping a number or hitting the hoop walls. Don't worry about getting injured if you hit a ring. They're made of transfigured magical mist, and they'll only change color to red if you make contact while passing through. Even if you hit a ring, just move on to the next one and try to finish in the shortest time possible. We teachers will observe your flying skills, how quickly you can finish, and how many rings you can pass through neatly without touching the hoop walls. He paused and glanced at the prefects, who were standing at the front of each house group. Prefects, please send 1 student from each house when I give the signal, starting from the left, Slytherin house first. Looking back at his colleagues, he gave them all a final nod and signaled for Gemma Farley to send the first student forward. Mr. Flint, I'm surprised you've chosen to go first. Are you ready? Maverick asked, raising an eyebrow as the Slytherin Quidditch team captain stepped forward. The boy nodded confidently. The position of the school team's chaser will be mine, Professor. I'll show everyone why we've won the last consecutive school cups. Maverick chuckled softly. He didn't mind the boldness. If anything, he appreciated the confidence. Starting the trial with a demonstration from a seasoned player like Flint seemed like a good thing anyway. Good luck, Maverick said with a smile, stepping aside to let Flint prepare. Meanwhile, the students whispered among themselves, discussing Flint's decision to go first. Their thoughts mirrored Maverick's in some ways, though with a touch of skepticism. TSK, this guy's a real idiot, volunteering to go first. One student muttered under their breath. Doesn't he know that the later you go, the more advantages you'll have? You can observe and learn from others' mistakes. Another student shrugged, looking uneasy. I don't know. I feel like the more I watch, the more nervous I'll get. A third student chimed in, crossing their arms. Yeah, but going first also means you set the standard. If Flint nails it, the rest of us will have to work twice as hard to impress the professors. Another voice piped up from the back, sounding defensive. Or maybe he's just confident. Not everyone needs to overthink everything. Sometimes it's better to just go for it. A Gryffindor nearby smirked and added, confident or not, I'm not letting a Slytherin show us up. If Flint can do it, so can I. It's all about strategy. A Ravenclaw added after thinking thoughtfully. Watch the angles of the hoops and plan your turns in advance. That's the key. The chatter continued, a mix of nerves, confidence, and competitive spirit filling the air, until Professor Caesar's magically amplified voice rang out for everyone to hear. The trial has officially begun. The first contestant is Mr. Marcus Flint from Slytherin House. Cheers erupted, mostly from the group of Slytherins, as Flint mounted his broom, gripping it tightly and ready to take off. Ready, set, go! Flint kicked the ground and shot forward like a rocket, his eyes locked on the hoop numbered 1. He passed through it flawlessly, his movements sharp and precise, drawing gasps and cheers from the crowd of students. Maverick raised a brow as he watched Flint's takeoff and the skill he displayed. He turned his head slightly and noticed that even Stephen standing beside him looked impressed by the precision and control Flint had over the broom. He's worthy of being the Slytherin team captain. Stephen nodded in agreement. Pretty good, but there's room for improvement, he added thoughtfully after a moment before jotting down a few notes. When the Slytherin seeker zigzagged through the air and neared the 15th ring, Maverick turned his attention back to the crowd and gestured to the prefects to send the next student. This time, it was the Gryffindor's turn to step forward, and before long, a familiar face made his way to the starting point. Get him, Oliver. Don't lose to Flint. The little witches and wizards of Gryffindor House cheered as Oliver Wood walked up and stopped in front of Maverick and Stephen. Not bad, Maverick commented, fixing his eyes on the captain of Gryffindor's Quidditch team, who exuded the same confidence as Flint had before him. Both were captains of their house's team, and it was clear that neither was willing to let the other hog all the spotlight. Flint will probably take the chaser's position, so it's up to you to show whether you've got what it takes to secure the keeper's spot, he added, offering a few words of encouragement as he handed the boy one of the neatly arranged brooms. Get ready. When I say go, you can take off. Moments later, just as Marcus Flint passed through the 20th hoop, Maverick gave the signal, and Oliver Wood took off toward the first ring. Wow! Go, Oliver! The Gryffindors shouted their support, their cheers just as loud and enthusiastic as those coming from the Slytherins beside them. And among their group, Ronald Weasley was practically bouncing with excitement, pointing at the sky with a fanatic look on his face. Just look at Oliver, Harry. His flying is as skilled as that slimy snake's. No, he's even faster. He's already passed the 5th ring. Harry nodded with a hum, but his expression was more anxious than the frantic excitement radiating from his friend. He couldn't help but feel the pressure as he watched the two seniors display their impressive skills, all while remembering the mission he had come here to accomplish. Just yesterday, he had been taken to the office of his head of house, Professor McGonagall, along with Oliver Wood, and was offered a spot on the Gryffindor Quidditch team as their seeker. It had all happened so suddenly, after the little accident during his first week, then being invited to join the practice and finally being offered an official spot on the team. After thinking about everything, Harry realized he had a natural talent for the sport and for flying in general. Unlike his studies, where he often felt like he was playing catch-up with everyone else, having come to Hogwarts without any prior knowledge of the wizarding world, Quidditch had given him a sense of confidence like nothing before. For the first time, he felt like he had something he was genuinely good at. And now, he wasn't satisfied with just being his house's seeker. He wanted more. He wanted to be the school team's seeker, or at least secure the reserve position, and was determined to make it happen by showing his skills today. Well, that was until he saw Flint and Oliver fly at their best. Watching their precision, speed, and control, he finally realized the level of competition he was up against. Meanwhile, look, number 22 turned red. Wait, it's green again. The comment came just as Flint passed through the 22nd hoop. The Slytherins looked worried watching the scene and started speculating about what may happen next. Does that mean he failed? He must have touched the wall of the ring, right? That's why it turned red for a moment. No, another student replied quickly. The professor said to keep going even if you hit a ring or miss one. His score might be lowered, but it's not a fail. As the students debated his performance, Flint, up in the air, didn't seem to notice that he had brushed against the ring. Whoosh! His focus remained sharp on the course ahead, nearing the finish line, determined to set a record that no student today can beat. With a graceful dive through the 29th ring, he took a sharp turn to the right and smoothly passed through the final one. Roar! He heard the loud cheers erupt from below and slowed down before coming to a stop, finally glancing down. His housemates were all clapping and shouting his name, and even some students from other houses joined in. His eyes then landed on another figure who had started while he was halfway through the trial. He couldn't help but raise a brow at the impressive maneuvering he was witnessing. Oliver controlled his broom with ease, turning left, right, up, and down as if he were walking, weaving effortlessly through ring after ring. He was already halfway through the course, and it was clear that this rival of his would very likely become the school team's keeper, his future teammate. "Flint, you can come down now. Fly around the rings instead of going through them and land next to us." He suddenly heard a voice in his ear, the voice of Professor Caesar. Looking down, he saw the man nodding at him and figured the professor had used some kind of voice transmission magic he wasn't familiar with. On the ground, Stephen made some notes before glancing at Maverick, who also turned to him. "That was good, honestly. I'd be surprised if we see anyone better, but we'll see. For now, this boy, Flint, would be my pick for Chaser's position." Maverick smiled. "He is the captain of Slytherin's Quidditch team, after all. But who knows? There may be some surprises," he said, glancing toward the Gryffindor group. His eyes landed on a figure watching Oliver, still in the air with a solemn expression. "Let's move on." There was already a Ravenclaw wizard in position, and Maverick gave the signal for him to start. Time moved on, and under the enthusiastic atmosphere of the trials, 3 hours passed in the blink of an eye. Over 100 students had been tested so far without any accidents, but there were still about twice that number waiting for their turn. Fortunately, this was a 2-day event, and he was confident he'd be able to test each and every student by the end of tomorrow. For today, there was still time, as the trials would continue after lunch. "Go and take a rest, Mr. Finnegan. You did well." Maverick turned to see McGonagall comforting a first-year student who had just finished his round. The boy looked dejected, clearly unhappy with his own performance. He nodded reluctantly and ran toward the group of Gryffindors, while the next in line stepped forward and stood before them. "Professor, I'm ready." The red-haired boy gave his affirmation, and McGonagall took the lead, handing him a broom. Meanwhile, Maverick's attention was on the 3 figures who had yet to finish their round. Apart from grading their flying skills, his main focus was ensuring that no students had any accidents. He didn't relax his vigilance for a moment, carefully observing every witch and wizard during their flight. "Remember to be careful and don't try to fly faster than you can control," McGonagall advised. She then looked at Maverick, waiting for his signal. A few moments later, he retracted his gaze from the sky and gave her a small gesture, telling her she could let him start. The Weasley twin, whom Maverick wasn't entirely sure which one, mounted the broom and got into position. Maverick watched with a hint of anticipation in his heart, wanting to see his skills. After all, they were key characters in the books, and they were said to be exceptionally good at flying. So far, not many names he was familiar with had taken their turn. Among the crowd, he could spot Harry, Ron, Cedric Diggory, Angelina, Roger Davies, and many others who hadn't yet tested their skills. He was looking forward to seeing how each of them would perform and whether they might surprise him. Whoosh! A small figure sliced through the air like an arrow, shooting straight up through the 17th obstacle before making a sharp right turn without much change in speed. His grip was tight on the broom handle, his body leaning forward, and his eyes focused like an eagle locking onto the next target. The 18th hoop was just ahead, and he leaned forward even more before accelerating toward it. His mind was so fixed on the task that not even the roar of the crowd below, chanting his name like a riot, caused the slightest reaction to distract him from achieving his goal. The trials had been going on for over half a day, with the sun already past its peak. During all this time, he had watched his friends and seniors take the test before him, never participating himself, just observing every twist and turn, every little trick they used to navigate through the trial, and noting down every technique he could use to make his turn count and succeed. Even though he hadn't had the chance to practice the things he had observed and taken into account, he had played them out in his mind countless times. Moreover, he was confident he could pass all 30 obstacles if he played it safe and flew cautiously. But that wasn't enough, because taking it easy simply wasn't an option. The competition was fierce, and only 4 people would be selected for the seeker position he was aiming for. "Wow! Amazing! Harry! Harry!" The voices were full of praise, even a little hysterical, filling the air. The atmosphere at the scene had reached its peak, with Gryffindor's cheers louder than anyone else's, echoing everywhere. With every turn Harry took, The crowd grew more and more excited. This was genuine appreciation for talent because no one had expected him, a first year, someone supposedly with zero flying experience before coming to Hogwarts just 2 weeks ago, to fly as impressively as the seasoned players from the senior grades. To top it all off, this was Harry Potter, the savior, the boy who lived. Seeing him display such remarkable skills captured everyone's attention, even from the rival houses, more than any other contestant had before him. Maverick had even halted the contestants scheduled after Harry from flying until he finished, simply because of the way Harry had taken off too fast for the boys' level. The last thing he wanted was to put the savior in danger, and he wanted to be fully concentrated during his entire run. And true to his thoughts, Harry flew fast, nearly pushing the limits of the broom he'd been given, but surprisingly controlled, with the finesse of experienced players like Flint and Oliver. It wasn't quite at their level, but it was definitely better than most, even surpassing the Weasley twins, who had finished the trials earlier. The twins, who presumably had the chance to practice flying all the time at home and had been flying since they were children, didn't even come close to the skill Harry was displaying at this moment. This kid is 11 years old? Watching the impressive maneuvers, the veteran Quidditch legend was also taken aback and couldn't help but voice his doubt. Standing beside him, Maverick smiled and shrugged before glancing at McGonagall to respond. Yes, Mr. Potter is a first year. Sensing the gaze and hearing Stephen's comment, she spoke clearly, addressing everything. In fact, he's never flown a broom in his life until a week ago. Perhaps 3 or 4 days of practice in the last 2 weeks, but that's all. Stephen turned his head sharply before asking again. You mean the kid has never flown in his entire life up until a few days ago? It was clear he was finding it hard to believe. After all, this kind of talent was nothing short of monstrous. He himself couldn't claim to be that good at that age. It should be true, Maverick chimed in, adding more details. To be honest, the boy should be new to everything magical until recently. This is... He paused, then added with a smile. This is just raw talent, worthy of being the chosen one. The chosen what? Stephen asked, confused, tilting his head. He then saw McGonagall raise a brow at his friend and remark, I didn't take you for one to believe in such things, Professor Caesar. Maverick shrugged, smiling amusedly as he saw them all growing serious. You have to admit, he's exceptionally gifted. I don't care much about prophecies, but he's definitely got the talent to rival that maniac Riddle. Cough. Professor, anyways, please concentrate. Potter's about to reach the last 5 rings. McGonagall quickly steered the conversation away from the taboo subject. Madame, Hooch, and Healer Pomfrey adopted thoughtful expressions listening to the conversation. But they knew better than to talk more about it, especially after seeing their deputy dean's knowing look. As for Stephen, he seemed even more confused now, but he knew how to read the room and when to press further or not. At this time, Harry had just passed through the 27th hoop, which was positioned the highest from the ground. The 28th hoop was to the left, and Harry made a sharp turn immediately after passing through, using his body's weight while gripping the broom even more tightly to avoid being thrown off by the momentum. You must know that the entire trial, from start to finish, took over 10 minutes, even for Flint, who finished the fastest. All that time, gripping tightly without giving your hands a break could strain them to the point where it would start to feel like a burn. And Harry Potter was not a physically fit boy, so for him to keep going nonstop like that could only be attributed to the boy's sheer willpower. The cheers from the young wizards did not stop. Instead, they grew louder and louder. Up until now, apart from Flint, only Harry had managed to pass with the fewest hoops turning red. Ronald Weasley, Harry's best friend, had already started to lose his voice from all the shouting and cheering. It was clear he was genuinely rooting for him. His own trial, however, had been a disaster. One of the few who had fallen off their broom after trying to bite off more than he could chew by attempting sharp turns like the senior students. Fortunately, Maverick, Stephen, and McGonagall had acted quickly. Those who lost their grip on their broom were either caught midair by Stephen or safely lowered to the ground with a levitation charm by McGonagall and Maverick, preventing any accidents. Just then, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. At this moment, Harry was seated on his broom, the whistling wind rushing past his ears as he moved at high speed. But his expression was anything but good. He had just passed the 29th hoop and made a sharp dive toward the 30th, which was positioned 10 meters below. But the fatigue in his arms and body had long reached its limit. The decisive downward turn, combined with his forward momentum, nearly sent him tumbling off the broom. But at the last moment, he managed to grip the handle tightly and continue his descent. His vision was already beginning to blur, and his arms felt like they were on fire, but he refused to give up. Just one last hoop to pass through, one last push before he could bring the broom to a stop and finally rest. His determination remained unshaken despite his body's protests. With sheer willpower, he made it through the final hoop. But just as he was about to slow his rapid descent, his body finally reached its breaking point. His vision went black. Gasp! The students' shouts erupted, many screaming in fright. To pass through the last hoop, one had to dive straight toward the ground. Though Harry had successfully passed with a green light, he had lost his grip on the broom and was now plummeting, his descent accelerated by the momentum of his earlier dive. There were about 50 meters between the final hoop and the ground. At that height, gravity would bring him down in mere seconds, making the panic coming from the crowd completely justified. Even Professor McGonagall looked visibly scared and had already drawn her wand and pointed it toward Harry. Stephen, on the other hand, knew that the distance was too great and the fall too fast for him to reach in time. Still, he immediately buckled down on his broom, ready to take off in a desperate attempt. Potter is falling too fast. Help! Professors, help! Amidst the panicked screams and rushed movements, a sudden, deafening boom shook the ground. Maverick had vanished from his spot, leaving behind a small crater where he once stood. A powerful gust of wind, mixed with dust and debris, scattered outward, making his colleagues who stood beside him stumble. In the blink of an eye, he was already rocketing toward Harry like a human missile. Just as Harry was about 5 meters from the ground, Maverick reached him, catching the boy while carefully slowing his momentum to avoid injury from the impact. With Harry in his grasp, Maverick gradually came to a halt, hovering mid-air. He immediately cast a diagnostic spell, his gaze sweeping over the unconscious boy. Fortunately, he detected nothing serious, only extreme exhaustion and no serious injuries. Letting out a quiet sigh of relief, he conjured a ball of water in mid-air, allowing it to fall over both of them, cooling Harry's overheated body. With the boy still in his arms, held in a secure carry, he hovered for a moment before a small smile tugged at his lips as Harry's eyes began to slowly open. Still floating, Maverick willed a construct of pure magic beneath his feet, forming a stable platform. He gently placed Harry onto it, then guided the floating platform toward where his group stood, heading to show him to Madame Pomfrey. Maverick himself was an accomplished healer, arguably even better than Pomfrey when it came to diagnostic and healing spells. However, since the others were unaware of this, it was better to let Pomfrey conduct her own examination to reassure them rather than him stating that Harry would recover after a good rest. "Professor, what just happened?" Harry mumbled, barely able to open his eyes, in a weak, almost inaudible voice. Maverick let out a small sigh. "That was a dangerous move, Mr. Potter. You should have watched your stamina and not pushed your body beyond its limit. Luckily for you, you nearly managed to survive crashing into the ground at high speed, breaking every bone in your body. What?" His words didn't even register with the already exhausted boy, so Maverick decided not to lecture him himself and instead left that task to McGonagall and Pomfrey later. As the construct carrying both of them began to move, thunderous applause and cheers erupted from the crowd, directed at both of them while chanting Harry's name even louder than before. "Harry! Harry! Harry!" As soon as Maverick landed, Madame Pomfrey rushed to Harry's side, crouching beside him as she pulled out her wand. With a decisive flick of her wand, the experienced healer cast a diagnostic spell under the worried gazes of McGonagall and the others, and carefully examined the boy's condition before sighing in relief a few seconds later. She then cast Maverick an appreciative glance before speaking thoughtfully. "Good work, Professor Caesar." The water helped stabilize his heartbeat and lower his rising temperature. Turning to Harry, she had half a mind to reprimand him for his recklessness. But seeing his half-lidded eyes, barely holding onto consciousness, she swallowed her words. There would be time for scolding later. She turned back to Maverick, then glanced at McGonagall before stating, "I'll take him to the hospital wing. He needs energy replenishment and proper rest." McGonagall's expression was still tense as she asked, "Is he all right? Anything serious?" Pomfrey shook her head. "He's completely exhausted. Barely any energy left in him. I doubt he can even properly hear us right now. But nothing serious. He'll be fine after a full day's rest." McGonagall let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, and so did several others. Then her gaze shifted to Maverick, and her eyes softened. "Thank you, Professor Caesar. You saved my student's life." Maverick quickly shook his head. "He's my student too, Professor. And besides, he turned to Stephen, who now looked relieved. I think we found our reserve seeker. Stephen blinked before nodding, a small smile tugging at his lips. I think so. I mean, he glanced at McGonagall before adding hesitantly. If he can promise not to be reckless with his body, and also improve his physical fitness, then I'd say he's a solid pick even for the full team. But there are a few other good candidates too. We'll see after next week's mock matches. Maverick didn't argue. The final decision was Stephen's to make, and he had no plans to interfere. As the cheering students slowly began murmuring amongst themselves, Maverick spotted Ron Weasley, Oliver Wood, and Percy Weasley approaching, all looking concerned. Ron arrived first, panting slightly from running. Professor, is Harry all right? His eyes flicked anxiously to Pomfrey, who was still waving her wand over Harry. She didn't look up as she responded. Harry Potter is fine. He's just exhausted. I'll take him to the hospital wing so he can rest. You may come if you wish and stay with your friend. Ron nodded without hesitation, following her as she levitated Harry toward the castle. Oliver and Percy did not follow, and after being reassured that Harry would be all right, they returned to the crowd. Meanwhile, the teachers and Stephen prepared to continue the trials. They still had a couple of hours left before the designated time to end for the day, and there were plenty of students waiting for their turn to showcase their skills. 2 days passed, and the trials to select the 28 players for next week's mock games had ended smoothly. Apart from a small incident involving Harry Potter, nothing alarming occurred, and by the end, both students and teachers seemed pleased with the results. But there were a few notable names selected by Coach Stephen that drew mixed reactions from both students and teachers. Among them were second-years Fred and George Weasley, as well as Cedric Diggory, the pretty boy who was to become Hufflepuff's Quidditch team captain next year. However, the biggest surprise of all was a first-year student and the standout star of the trials, Harry Potter himself. Nobody, not even the rival teams, protested his selection, as he had proven his skill by matching Flint's record, successfully passing 29 out of 30 hoops with green, and did so in nearly the same time frame. All 4 of them still had a gap between themselves and the top senior players, but Coach Stephen remained optimistic. He believed they had great potential and was confident that with effort and dedication, he could shape them into fine players before the tournament, as long as they passed next week's assessment. Finally, the person most delighted was, of course, Professor McGonagall. Seeing so many talented Quidditch players from Gryffindor, she was absolutely thrilled. She couldn't stop smiling as she gathered the team together and praised them non-stop for their impressive skills. On Monday, the busy routine of learning for the students and teaching for the professors resumed. Only Maverick had the most free time, with only 2 classes, each an hour and a half long, spread over 3 days a week. The other 2 days were even lighter, with just 1 class in the morning. However, he was plenty occupied with other things. During his free time, he would head home to visit his family or stop by his company to check on the business and oversee things, especially now with the upcoming release of his new product at the end of the month. After teaching his 2 classes, he left the school and didn't return until after sunset. That evening, he had a meeting with the headmaster, giving him a brief summary of the trials held over the weekend. When he mentioned what had happened with Harry, Dumbledore didn't seem too concerned. He simply advised against pushing the students too hard, but was otherwise very pleased with how things were going. By the time Maverick left the headmaster's office, it was already past curfew. As he walked toward his office, he suddenly sensed 2 fluctuations of magic at the level of mage apprentices, clearly 2 students moving suspiciously through one of the corridors. With midnight approaching, it was almost certain they were out past curfew, sneaking around where they shouldn't be. Feeling a little bored, he decided to see who they were and began moving in their direction. To his surprise, the closer he got, the more they seemed to move away, as if they could somehow sense his approach, almost like a form of magical sense. But that would be impossible for mere mage apprentices. There was only one explanation: they were using an alchemical tool to track his movements. A smirk tugged at his lips as a sudden playful urge to catch the 2 little mice took over. He quickened his pace, already having a good idea of who they might be. After all, as an upright and responsible professor of the school, it was only right for him to discipline students who were misbehaving, wasn't it? So, in the next second, he snapped his fingers, letting the disillusionment charm wash over him. With a smooth flick of his wrist, he followed it up with a silencing spell, ensuring his movements and sounds disappeared without a trace. There was nothing he could do about being detected by an alchemy tool, at least not unless he got his hands on it and made a few tweaks. That was part of the reason he was about to play this game of cat and mouse. By studying the tool, he could also create a countermeasure to prevent anything like this from detecting his name again in the future. Once everything was in place, he observed the two little troublemakers' movements. He saw that they had stopped somewhere on the third floor, likely hiding, he thought with a smirk. Then, with a decisive push of his body, he shot forward like a silent arrow, zigzagging through the corridors and up the stairs. In just a couple of seconds, he was already standing in front of the two, who, to his surprise, were also under disillusionment. "Huh? Did you feel anything just now?" He heard a faint whisper coming from behind the statue in front of him. "What? No. But I think there's something wrong with the map, Fred." Although Maverick couldn't see them with his eyes, he could follow their actions just as clearly from this close using his magical sense. "Look!" The professor's name disappeared suddenly. Disappeared? No, George. He's not disappeared. His position has changed. He seems to be. Maverick heard their whispers falter, followed by an audible gulp, and a sudden urge to laugh stirred within him. But he held it back and continued to watch their next move with amused curiosity. "But I can't see anything, Fred. Idiot. If we're under disillusionment, then so can the professor." There was an awkward silence for a few seconds before the drama continued. "What if this is just our imagination, Fred? Maybe the map's damaged." "You're right, George. Professor Caesar can't possibly be here and not say anything by now." They whispered to one another, their thoughts in perfect sync, like two sides of the same coin. "Okay, let's go back." Hearing this, Maverick quickly dodged to the side, sensing them move like two cartoon characters, bent over and walking on tiptoe. Every few steps, they would stop to glance at the map, look nervously over their shoulders, gulp, and then move again, hoping the name they were seeing on the map following behind them was just a glitch. Maverick did his best to hold back the laughter bubbling in his stomach, deciding it was finally time to reveal himself. Just as the two redheads turned forward and started moving again, Maverick canceled his disillusionment and cleared his throat, calling out to them, "Good evening." Fred and George froze on the spot and slowly turned their heads while their faces broke into ridiculous smiles. Professor, we were just..." They were met with their professor looking amusedly at them with an eyebrow raised, clearly not by accident. They tried to come up with an excuse, but seeing the smirk on Maverick's lips grow wider, they struggled to rack their brains to think of anything to say. "Well, shall we take a walk? I'm sure you can explain on the way," Maverick said, chuckling. He decided to spare them from the embarrassing torture. A couple of minutes later, the Weasley twins were seen walking on either side of Maverick. Their previous anxiety had disappeared, as they realized Maverick wasn't pressing the issue and simply seemed to be escorting them to the common room. Instead of worrying, they were now talking leisurely as they walked. "Well, I heard you like to make joke props. You know, that's also alchemy, and it can't be done without knowledge of rune circuits." "Who did you learn from?" Maverick asked casually. "It's Dad, Professor," Fred said with a grin. "He loves to tinker with muggle stuff and always tries to mix it with magic. We learned basic runes from him when we were little." "Oh, interesting," Maverick thought. "So, you both like alchemy?" He saw them hesitate before Fred, on his right, added, "We love creating joke gadgets, Professor." "That's right. But we don't want to lie and say alchemy is our favorite subject. But we do love creating things." Maverick appreciated their honesty and thought that both of them could be useful in the future. At their age, being able to understand basic rune circuits and create simple gadgets without formal education in the subject was nothing short of genius. He then finally asked them what he had actually wanted to know. "By the way, how did you both know I was coming?" Maverick asked, keeping his tone casual. "I could sense through magic that you were aware of my movements." At his question, the twins exchanged a glance before nodding, silently coming to an agreement. For them, things weren't complicated. If they felt they could trust someone, they tended to be open. Maybe they thought they couldn't fool him with an excuse, or perhaps it was just that they felt a sense of trust from him. Whatever the reason, they decided to come clean. "We saw you on a map," Fred said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a rolled-up parchment, and handed it to Maverick. "We got this from Filch's office. It's called the Marauder's Map, and it shows everyone in Hogwarts and their movements." Maverick raised an eyebrow, looking like he was surprised. Of course, he knew all about the Marauder's Map, but the twins had no idea about that. "May I take a look?" The twins nodded in unison, handing him the rolled-up parchment. Maverick unfurled the map as they walked, without any halt in their pace. It seems blank, he said, glancing at the empty rugged paper. Well, that's because, Fred started. You need a secret phrase, George finished. They then stopped walking, and Maverick let them demonstrate. George raised his wand, waved it, and spoke the familiar words. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. The parchment immediately came to life as black ink materialized, forming a detailed map with names and footsteps moving all around. Fascinating, Maverick couldn't help but say. It was true, even for him, a master alchemist, the map was a real masterpiece. It was hard to imagine that it had been created by a bunch of students during their leisure time. The twins noticed the genuinely interested look in their professor's eyes and exchanged a satisfied smile. After a while, Maverick rolled the parchment back up. Instead of handing it back immediately, he gave them a mischievous smile, holding it for just a moment longer. It was only then that the twins realized, despite Maverick being just a few years older than them and seeming easygoing, he was still a professor. A reluctant smile formed on their lips, regret clear in their expressions, and they finally nodded to Maverick for the inevitable confiscation they thought was about to happen. After a while, Maverick burst into a chuckle, letting the tension ease, and spoke. Let me borrow this for a few days. You know, I'm a man of alchemy, so when I see something this interesting, I just have to see how it works. But I promise to return it in a few days, and I'll keep it a secret and pretend I know nothing about this, Maverick said, smiling and giving a wink at the end. The brothers' eyes immediately lit up, and they started bobbing their heads like chickens in agreement. Finally, a professor who understood their feelings, they thought excitedly, and even their eyes turned a little moist. Maverick's eyes twitched at their exaggerated reaction, and he quickly resumed walking, picking up the pace to send these two troublemakers back. After a few minutes of walking, they reached their destination. I'll let you know when I finish studying this, Maverick said, and his tone turning serious before adding. But I don't want you spying on professors, even after you get it back. The brothers nodded quickly, their faces serious for a moment before their usual mischievous grins returned. Maverick sighed. All right, off you go, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Just as the fat lady in the frame opened her mouth, they heard him call out one last time. Oh, and that will be 10 points from Gryffindor for each of you. Fred and George immediately turned to plead, but to their astonishment, there was no one there. Wait, where did he go? Fred asked, his voice confused. I don't know, Fred. Let's just go in, George replied, equally bewildered. The twins stood there, confused for a while, until they finally shrugged it off and entered the common room. After escorting the Weasley twins back to their common room, Maverick headed straight to his office without any detours. Settling into the comfort of his chair, his first order of business was to examine the map for any extraordinary characteristics. But within moments, his anticipation turned to disappointment. The map had only one feature, a basic-grade, radar-like function that worked solely within the confines of Hogwarts. He had hoped for something more, like a mini-map, but it seemed his expectations had been too high. Still, the map wasn't entirely useless. By studying it, he could figure out how to prevent his name or presence from being detected by such magical items in the future, and that, at least, was something. After some thought, he decided to keep the map for a few days, tweak it a bit for good measure, and then return it to the twins. Letting out a sigh, he rolled up the worn parchment, set it aside, and finally collapsed into bed, drifting off to sleep. Time passed slowly, and before anyone knew it, the weekdays had come and gone without anything out of the ordinary happening at school. The only noteworthy thing was the constant buzz about Quidditch and the team selection set for the following week. And so, on Saturday morning, the entire school gathered at the official Quidditch stadium to spectate this highly anticipated event. The 28 players were divided into 4 teams based on their positions, and the first match began quickly, without any complications or protests about the team assignments. Although there were rivalries and even grudges between the students, they didn't show it in front of Stephen and seemed to have a good impression of his choices. Most of them were seniors from the 5th, 6th, and 7th grades, so they weren't as immature as the freshmen who would turn everything to a fight. Throughout the match, Stephen remained completely focused on their performance. As the referee and in control of the flow of the game, he thoroughly tested their speed, precision, teamwork, and adaptability. And the players gave their all, knowing that their performance would decide whether they earned a spot on the final team. Just before lunchtime, the first game between the first 14 players ended amid loud cheers and chatter from the audience. However, unlike regular Quidditch matches held on this field, There were no calls of house names, just the roar of Hogwarts and the cheers of individual student supporters. After lunch, the remaining two teams took to the field for their turn. This match was just as competitive as the morning round, each player pushing themselves to their limit, determined to make an impression. Cheers and gasps echoed from the stands as the audience, students eager to witness the best their school had to offer, watched with rapt attention. But just when they thought the trials were over, Stephen had one last test in mind. Without tracking scores, he set up a final match, rotating all 28 players frequently. This time, the focus wasn't on competition but on individual performance. How well each student could handle unexpected shifts, adapt to different teammates, and hold their ground under pressure. By the time the final match ended, exhaustion was clear on the players' faces, but more so was the anxiety about the selection. Stephen gathered them all together and launched into a long coach-like speech. He didn't outright tell them which players would be selected and which would be eliminated, but gave an encouraging speech, urging everyone to work hard. He reminded them that every year, the team would be chosen through a similar process, and their efforts now would lay the groundwork for future success. His words seemed to ease the tension among the students. While some still looked disappointed, the promise of future opportunities softened the blow. With that, Stephen dismissed them, allowing the players to rest and the audience to disperse back to their common rooms. However, the real decision-making was yet to come. Later that evening, after dinner, Maverick, McGonagall, Stephen, and Madame Hooch gathered in a classroom to deliberate over the final team selection. The mock matches had showcased each student's skills, and with their talents so evenly matched, the decision was more difficult than they had expected. Nonetheless, it had to be made, as only half of the 28 players would make the final cut. After about 2 hours of heated discussion, they managed to select a balanced team of 7 starters and 7 reserves. The team consisted of Marcus Flint as the captain, with Oliver Wood as the vice-captain, filling the positions of seeker and keeper. Meanwhile, Harry Potter, along with a Ravenclaw student named Grant Page, was selected as the reserves for their roles. For the chasers, Cedric Diggory from Hufflepuff, Roger Davies and Jeremy Stretton from Ravenclaw were selected. For the beater positions, Peregrine Derrick, a 7th year from Slytherin, and Maxine O'Flaherty secured spots on the starting team. Similarly, the reserve team was carefully chosen to maintain a balanced mix of players from all 4 houses. After some discussion, they decided to announce the 14 names on the notice board the next morning rather than announcing them publicly. This way, any disagreements or complaints would be handled individually, rather than dealing with a large group of students confronting them all at once. If anyone had concerns, they would have to approach Coach Stephen or the professors separately. Within moments, whispers turned into excited chatter as the names on the notice board were read aloud, and reactions began to spread throughout the corridor. By the time breakfast started, the Great Hall was buzzing with excitement. Congratulations and cheers erupted for those who had made the team, while others expressed their disappointment, quietly consoling one another. "Harry, you got in," Ron Weasley exclaimed, clapping his friend on the back. "Well, as a reserve, but still." Harry grinned, though a small part of him wished he'd made the main team. Still, he couldn't deny the satisfaction of being selected, even if he was a substitute. After being congratulated by Ron, Harry found himself surrounded by his housemates, who were eager to share in his achievement. For once, he felt genuinely pleased to be in the spotlight. Unlike before, when whispers and stares followed him due to the mysterious fall of the Dark Lord, this recognition felt different. This time, it was about something he had done, not an event shrouded in mystery that he had no memory of. It was a welcome change. At the same time Harry Potter was getting showered with attention, the other students who had been selected, as well as those who were eliminated, were experiencing similar scenes. Some were being congratulated, their friends patting them on the back and exchanging excited words. Others, however, took the news of their elimination with a quiet acceptance, making comments to themselves about what they could have done better. And there were those who received words of encouragement from their peers, a few offering reassurance that they would have another chance next year. "I was this close," a 7th-year Hufflepuff sighed, gulping down his drink before setting the glass on the table with a soft thud. "Next year, I guess." He gave a small, rueful smile, clearly disappointed but trying to make light of it. "You won't have a next year," his friend pointed out. "Don't remind me," he groaned, slumping back in his seat. At the Slytherin table, Marcus Flint smirked, basking in the attention. "Of course, I made captain. Who else could lead this team?" At the Ravenclaw table, a group of students analyzed the selections with sharp scrutiny. Diggory as a chaser, huh? One mused. Didn't expect that. He is good, another admitted, listening to the comments around him. Good as you, Roger? A third student chimed in, glancing at Roger Davies, who, like Cedric Diggory, had secured a chaser spot on the full team. We're a team now, Roger replied thoughtfully, avoiding a direct answer. If he's better than me, then that's a plus for the team. TSK. You're really taking this teamwork thing seriously, huh? Of course, Roger said, his expression firm. He was an avid fan of Stephen and had a high opinion of the new professor, whom he had met earlier on the train. Now that they were both leading the school team, Roger was determined not to disappoint them. And at the Gryffindor table, a group of seniors surrounded a burly boy, discussing his selection as one of the beaters. I knew you'd make it, one of them said, clapping him on the back. Yeah, but I have to stay on top of my game, Maxine O'Flaherty replied, his expression more determined than celebratory. Coach said if he's not satisfied, he won't hesitate to switch us out for the reserves at any time. Instead of feeling pressured, he grinned at the end. Well, I won't let that happen. No quaffles getting past us without a fight. That's the spirit, another Gryffindor cheered. While the Great Hall buzzed with students commenting on the team selections, the staff table remained relatively quiet. Maverick, Stephen, and McGonagall sat together, observing the excitement with quiet interest. Since it was the weekend, most professors were either out of school or busy with other tasks, leaving the table mostly empty except for the three of them. They had come prepared, half expecting raised voices or complaints, but it seemed the results had been accepted more smoothly than they'd anticipated. Well, this has gone much better than expected, Maverick said, looking ahead with a hint of relief mixed in his voice. McGonagall gave a small nod while scanning the Great Hall. Indeed. It seems most of them have accepted the results. She smiled before glancing at Stephen on her left. Thank you, Coach Stephen. Her approving smile grew wider. I hope we can secure the cup with these boys and girls. Stephen chuckled, setting down his goblet. That's the plan, Professor. After the lively feast, students and teachers scattered to their respective spaces, chatting about the coming days with excitement. Back in his office, Maverick first loosened his robe and, with a casual flick of his wand, sent it floating to the hanger, making himself more comfortable. He then strolled to the window, gazing out over the darkened grounds toward the Forbidden Forest. A quick glance at his watch made him nod to himself, as if confirming something only he understood. It was almost 10 in the evening here, which meant it was around 5 o'clock in New York. His meeting with his company's board of directors, one he had been postponing for days, was scheduled soon. They had important matters to discuss, especially the upcoming release of Magic Vision and a few other business concerns. Earlier that day, he had spoken with Ali, the man overseeing most of his company's operations, to set up the meeting for sunset. That still gave him more than an hour. Plenty of time to enjoy a quiet moment after a long, eventful day. Or so he thought. As his gaze drifted absently over the grounds, a flicker of movement caught his sharp eyes. A shadowy figure slipping quickly toward the Forbidden Forest. Maverick frowned. His passive magical sense didn't extend that far, and he wasn't about to recklessly probe it actively outward without knowing who it was. But recalling some memories, he had a strong suspicion of whom it might be. The next moment, he retrieved the Marauder's map from his storage ring, unfolded it, and scanned the parchment. There, just near the edge of the castle's detection range, a single name was moving toward the trees. Quirinus Quirrell. Interesting, he thought. The map, of course, showed nothing of the noseless wanker latched onto the man's head. Apparently, it didn't register a leech of that sort as a separate life. Maverick tapped his fingers against the edge of the map, considering his options. He still had time before his meeting, and really, he wanted to see the novice village boss in action. With a smirk, he folded the map, tucked it away, and turned toward the window. With a few precise gestures, his combat suit wrapped around him, its enchantments activating instantly. The fabric shimmered briefly before rendering him invisible, its concealment charms suppressing any trace of his presence. He followed up with a few additional spells, silencing his footsteps, dampening his magical aura, and reinforcing the invisibility effect. Then, without hesitation, he stepped onto the windowsill. A moment later, he leapt into the night, soaring soundlessly toward the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest was deathly silent, the usual rustling of nocturnal creatures absent, as if they sensed something unnatural lurking in the darkness. Quirinus Coral tiptoed cautiously through the undergrowth, his breath shallow, his every step careful not to snap a twig beneath his boot. The hood of his robes was pulled low, concealing the grotesque presence latched onto the back of his head, the fragmented soul of Lord Voldemort. The air was cold, unnaturally so. Whether it was the chill of the night or the presence of his master, Quirrell did not know. He could feel beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the temperature. "You are too slow, Quirrell," a hissing voice sneered inside his skull, fumbling through the forest like a frightened child. "Do you think the unicorns will simply lie down and wait for you to slit their throats?" Quirrell swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he steadied himself against a tree. I am being careful, my lord," he whispered hoarsely, afraid of being overheard even though he knew they were alone. "Teach the centaurs patrol this area. If they catch us—" "Excuses," Voldemort spat. "I did not choose you to be a pitiful, stuttering fool just to watch you scurry around like a frightened rat." Quirrell winced. He had tried. He really had. But hunting a unicorn in the dead of night, all while enduring the Dark Lord's relentless scorn, was far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. They pressed forward, Quirrell moving more quickly now, both out of fear and urgency. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy above, casting eerie patterns on the forest floor. He clutched his wand tightly, his knuckles white. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he saw it. A unicorn. It stood in a small clearing, its silver-white coat glowing faintly under the moonlight. It was young, perhaps barely past foalhood, its movements graceful yet cautious. It lowered its head to drink from a small stream, completely unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. Quirrell's heart pounded. His breath caught in his throat. "Now, Quirrell," Voldemort commanded, his voice seething with impatience. "Do it." Quirrell hesitated. Quirrell's grip on his wand tightened, his fingers damp with sweat. The unicorn was so pure, so defenseless. This mere presence made him feel wrong. "Fool! Do not make me repeat myself." Voldemort's voice lashed through his mind, sharp and cold. "Strike it down. I need its blood." Quirrell flinched at the command, his body trembling. But he forced himself to act. With a quick thrust of his wand, he cast a blasting curse. The spell shot forward like a thunderbolt, but at the very last moment, the unicorn moved, just enough to avoid instant obliteration. The blast struck its side instead, sending it tumbling onto the damp forest floor. The creature reared back, letting out a piercing, heart-wrenching cry before its legs buckled. It collapsed, its luminous silver blood already pooling beneath its broken form. Quirrell swallowed hard, his stomach twisting. "Fool! Just use the killing curse." Voldemort spat, his frustration simmering. "Must I guide your every pathetic action?" I'm sorry, Master," Quirrell stammered. I shall do it now." His wand trembled as he raised it, mouth dry, ready to cast the green light of death. But Voldemort stopped him. "Enough. It has nearly met its end." Quirrell hesitated, then slowly lowered his wand. His hands still shook, but he let out a shaky breath. It was done. The forest fell silent. Within the rustling of trees, unbeknownst to them, a hidden presence watched their every action from the shadows. Maverick remained perfectly still, his invisibility spell keeping him hidden among the thick foliage. He had followed Quirrell through the forest, tracking his movements with ease. Neither Voldemort's wraith nor the timid professor had noticed his presence. Now, as he stared at the fallen unicorn, something twisted in his chest. It was so small, so pure. Its silver blood began to pool beneath its drying body, shimmering under the moonlight like liquid stardust. His fingers twitched at his side. A part of him wanted, no, ached to interfere, to stop this. He had the power to do so. He was nearing the rank of an archmagus, and the Voldemort currently leeching off Quirrell was nothing more than a wraith. A mere shadow of the Dark Lord he once was. There was no threat here, and yet he did not move. Not because he was afraid. Not because he was bound by the script of destiny. But because this needed to happen. The world needed Voldemort to return. The wizarding world needed chaos, needed fear. Only then would they be desperate enough to rally behind a true leader, someone strong enough to bring them together under one rule. Maverick exhaled slowly, forcing his emotions aside, and watched as Quirrell knelt beside the unicorn's corpse, scooping a handful of silver blood before shakily bringing it to his mouth. He could see the hesitation, the revulsion flickering across Quirrell's pale face, but it didn't last long. Drink, you pathetic fool. Voldemort's voice slithered through the air, laced with disgust and impatience. Quirrell flinched at the command, his lips pressing together in a tight line. Then, with a visible shudder, he obeyed. The first taste made him gag. He coughed, nearly spilling the shimmering liquid from his hands, but another sharp hiss from Voldemort silenced his resistance. His next gulp was steadier, and the one after that more desperate. The unicorn let out a weak, yet piercing wail. Its silver eyes seemed to be dimming with the last embers of life, but somehow, he felt it was staring directly at him. Was it a coincidence, or had it sensed his presence? A strange, uncomfortable weight settled in Maverick's chest. He had seen death countless times, had caused it when necessary, yet something about this creature, its purity, its helplessness, made him hesitate. But this was not the time to play hero. Not yet. Perhaps, once Voldemort had taken what he needed, there would still be time to save it. So he waited, silent as a phantom, watching as Quirrell Quirrell knelt beside the dying unicorn. The timid professor hesitated for only a second before scooping up the shimmering silver blood with his hands and drinking greedily, gulping down mouthful after mouthful like it was the rarest delicacy. Maverick's magical senses stretched outward, studying them both. He could feel the shift, the slow but undeniable strengthening of the parasite attached to Quirrell's body. With each drop consumed, Voldemort's presence became heavier, darker, his aura clawing its way back from the brink of nothingness. But it didn't bother him. Even if Voldemort fully latched onto Quirrell, even if he claimed every last scrap of the professor's vitality, the most he could muster was the strength of a beginner great magus. And that was nothing to Maverick. 10 minutes passed in eerie silence before Quirrell finally staggered back to his feet. His face, once gaunt and pale, now held the faintest hint of life. His breath no longer came in ragged gasps, and his stance was steadier than before. Then, from the back of his head, came a low, sibilant hiss. Kill it, and save the rest of the blood for a later time. Maverick exhaled slowly, finally making up his mind. Just as Quirrell raised his wand, preparing to cast the killing curse, a heavy, distorted voice echoed through the trees, seemingly coming from everywhere at once. Leave! The voice rumbled, resonating through the dense forest and vibrating the air around them. Quirrell froze mid-motion, his eyes darting frantically in every direction. It was only one word, yet the meaning was clear in the tone. It was either oblige or perish. Voldemort's voice then followed, louder and more insistent, roaring in his mind. Up, you fool! It's up there, ahead of you. Quirrell hesitantly raised his wand, his breath shallow, and slowly turned his gaze toward the direction he was commanded. There, in the misty gloom of the forbidden forest, hovering above the trees under the moonlight, was a figure. A tall, imposing silhouette draped in black. Kill it, and save the rest of the blood for later. Voldemort's cold, dispassionate command sealed the creature's fate. The unicorn lay sprawled on the forest floor, its silver blood gleaming in the moonlight, its breath shallow but still there. Maverick had watched in silence until now, but this was enough. He exhaled slowly, positioning himself above Quirrell, his voice slipping into the deep, eerie resonance of the Bloodraven. Leave! The word echoed through the trees, thick with unspoken menace. Quirrell had his wand ready for the final strike but suddenly froze. His fingers twitched, and his body went rigid. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, he took an unsteady step back, his eyes darting frantically through the darkness. Maverick had laced his voice with a sliver of his dominant spirit. Just enough to push, just enough to make Quirrell feel that obeying wasn't a choice, but a command. Then Voldemort's voice lashed through Quirrell's mind like a whip. Calm yourself, fool. Look up. Ahead of you. Quirrell's breath came quick and shallow as he slowly lifted his wand and turned his gaze in the direction he was ordered. He saw a tall figure cloaked in black, hovering just above the trees. Its silhouette was sharp against the moonlight, watching with eyes as red as blood. Quirrell's eyes locked onto the figure, and in that moment, he felt as though he had been stripped bare, exposed down to his very soul. Who are you? He stammered, and instinctively took yet another step back. And there was no response to his question. Instead, he saw it descend slowly to the ground and hover just about a meter from the ground. The timid professor tightened his grip on his wand, gulped, and forced himself to speak again. Who are you? His voice was steadier this time. You realize you are trespassing? I am a professor at Hogwarts, and a low chuckle interrupted him. The Forbidden Forest, the figure said, voice deep and resonant, does not officially fall under Hogwarts jurisdiction. Even the castle's wards do not extend this far. Quirrell faltered. That was true. The forest was dangerous, largely untamed, and beyond the castle's protective magic. He opened his mouth to respond, but the figure spoke again, this time with unmistakable mockery. I must say, I never thought Hogwarts had such low standards. Hiring a wraith-infested dark wizard to teach children. It laughed, the sound rich with contempt. I always hear Dumbledore was incompetent. But this? He left the words unspoken. Quirrell stiffened, feeling a surge of indignation. But before he could gather himself to respond, Voldemort's voice rang sharp and commanding in his mind. Let me speak. Quirrell hesitated, his breath hitching. Now, worm! His body jerked against his will as Voldemort forcibly seized control. Slowly, rigidly, Quirrell turned. His trembling hands rose to his turban, fingers fumbling slightly as he unwrapped it. Maverick's eyes twitched under the mask. He had seen a similar scene in the movie, but watching it in real life was something else entirely. The pale, grotesque face that emerged from the back of Quirrell's head was even more disturbing in person. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched between them as Voldemort's sunken, snake-like eyes locked onto him. Maverick, still hovering just above the ground, stared back, unflinching. Then Voldemort spoke. His voice was slow, thoughtful. I did not expect there to be a new Archmagus. Maverick responded immediately, his voice thick with the ancient resonance of the Bloodraven. If you think that, he said, then you're even more stupid than I thought. Voldemort's eyes narrowed dangerously. Who are you? Maverick tilted his head slightly. I should be the one asking you, right? Who are you, anyway? Voldemort's voice became colder. Do not test my patience. Maverick chuckled darkly. I am merely here to meet the leader of the Centaurs. He quickly invented a reason and spoke. Imagine my surprise when I found a wraith lurking in Hogwarts. His voice turned sharp, mocking. I recently had to deal with someone like you, a wizard dabbling in demonology. And yet, here you are. What a coincidence. Voldemort's expression twisted, his pale features contorting with rage. A wraith? He hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Is that truly what you think I am? I am Voldemort, the Dark Lord. The name alone struck fear into the hearts of millions. So much so that they dared not even speak it. Oh! Maverick smirked under the mask. So you're that guy. The only king. Wait, no, calling you a king would be an insult to every archmage. After all, you were brought down by an infant. He let out a sharp, derisive laugh. The sound distorted and heavy through his mask, dripping with mockery. To Voldemort, the metallic echo made it even more cutting, as if the very air was amplifying the insult. Now look at you, he continued, a parasitic remnant of the once mighty wizard. How the mighty have fallen. Voldemort's features darkened, but then, out of nowhere, his tone changed, silkier, more persuasive. You clearly possess great power. I could grant you even more. Wealth, knowledge, magic beyond your imagination. Stand by my side. And Maverick cut him off with an even louder, sharper laugh. You? He scoffed. You are in no position to offer anything. Look at you. He gestured lazily. A whisper of what you once were. You're not even qualified to stand as my equal, let alone my superior. Voldemort's face contorted in fury. You dare. I'm honestly surprised you're even alive. Maverick continued smoothly, as though Voldemort hadn't spoken. He leaned forward slightly, his crimson-tinged eyes gleaming. I'm curious. How did you survive? How did the great Lord Voldemort come to this? Clinging to the back of a little magus like a parasite. That was it. Voldemort's patience snapped. You insolent! He roared, forcing Quirrell's body to raise his wand. Avada Kedavra! A jet of sickly green light erupted from the tip. Maverick didn't move, at least not in the way Voldemort expected. With a flick of his finger, a metallic shield materialized in front of him. The killing curse struck its gleaming surface and dispersed instantly, vanishing as though it had never existed. The shield shimmered, its deep bluish sheen fading just a moment later as it began reverting to its original state. A near-perfect mimicry of vibranium, one of Maverick's more advanced transfiguration experiments. He could form it, but its structure was too unstable to last long. But he didn't need it to, as it was a perfect counter to the killing curse, perhaps even a bit excessive if he was being honest. Lowering his finger, he looked at Voldemort while curling his lips in amusement under the mask. Oh, how the mighty have indeed fallen. He shook his head, his voice rich with mockery. Once, the Dark Lord's name was feared across the wizarding world. Now, you're not even a shadow of that name. That body you're parasitizing can't even muster the power of a great magus. Pathetic. Voldemort seethed, his snake-like nostrils flaring. Watching Voldemort get riled up like this, Maverick's amusement grew even more. But he forced himself to hold back his thoughts as he had more important things on his schedule for the evening. Besides, he had no plans to take down Voldemort now. He wasn't even sure if it was possible, because Voldemort might just flee from Quirrell's body at the last minute, which would make the plot unpredictable for him. Voldemort had no knowledge of Maverick's thoughts. He only saw the figure in front of him, its crimson eyes narrow dangerously at him. Then suddenly, the weight of the sky pressed down on his already broken soul, causing his snake-like pupils to widen in disbelief. He had only guessed before, but now he was sure. This is dominant spirit. So, you are indeed a new Archmagus. The heir of Slytherin stammered uncomfortably, but despite this, he did not lower his gaze. Evil as he was, his will was as firm as a mountain. If he were at his peak, Maverick figured he would have to unleash his spirit with full force to bring about a reaction. But that was an if. Right now, the Dark Lord was nothing in front of his eyes. I don't have time to play with you, Maverick said in a dismissive tone. The indifference in his voice only fueled Voldemort's rage even more. How dare this unknown wizard speak to him like that? Not even Dumbledore had ever dared to address him so disrespectfully, Voldemort thought, his mind burning with raw anger. You insolent! He hissed, but then cut himself off. His anger burned hotter with every second. But beneath that fire, a cold, unwelcome truth gnawed at him. He was not at his full strength. The figure before him, whoever he was an Archmagus. And even if that assumption was wrong, he knew better than to pick a fight in his current state. The distorted voice once again cut through the tension. Disappear, Riddle. You are not welcome here. Voldemort stiffened, his snake-like eyes glowing red with anger. The one thing he hated more than anything was the reminder of his Muggle heritage, and this figure in front of him knew about it. But before he could voice how this mysterious figure knew that information, he heard it speak again. If we truly fight here, Maverick said, the old monster in the castle might sense the magical fluctuations. I'm sure neither of us wants that to happen. He let the words settle, watching as Voldemort's expression darkened further. Leave and never return to harm the unicorns again. If you do, I will hunt you down. A moment of silence stretched between them. Voldemort's eyes gleamed with malice. You think you can order me? He spat. You overestimate yourself. I will return to my full strength soon enough, and when I do, you will regret this arrogance. Maverick tilted his head slightly. We shall see. Voldemort bared his teeth, but after a tense pause he turned. His form lifted off the ground, his lower body shifting into black smoke as he glided through the air. His dark robes billowed like living shadows, and within moments, he vanished into the night, his flight spell carrying him swiftly away. Maverick waited, watching the space where Voldemort had vanished. Only when he was sure the Dark Lord was far enough did he exhale quietly and turn his attention to the wounded unicorn. Kneeling beside the creature, he placed a hand gently on its pale, silver blood-stained fur. The unicorn was barely clinging to life, its breath shallow. Without hesitation, Maverick muttered an incantation, channeling healing magic through his fingertips. A soft, golden glow enveloped the unicorn's wounds, sealing them slowly but steadily. But it wasn't enough. He reached into his storage ring and retrieved a handful of rare healing herbs, collected over the past 2 years during his travels across the world. He crushed them with precise movements, mixing them with a bit of his magic, and pressed the herbal paste onto the unicorn's wounds. Minutes passed in silence. Then, at last, the unicorn stirred. His breathing, once labored, began to steady. The raw wounds faded, its strength visibly returning at a remarkable pace. Maverick watched, momentarily in amazement. No magical creature he knew of could heal this fast, except perhaps for a phoenix. He exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. Then, without looking up, he spoke, his voice shifting once more into the distorted resonance of the Bloodraven. You can come out now. The forest remained still. But Maverick had known for some time that something, had been watching since even before Voldemort had left. A faint rustling of leaves broke the silence. Then, from the shadows of the trees, a centaur emerged. The Forbidden Forest was a vast, ancient realm where towering trees stretched endlessly into the night sky. It was home to creatures of every kind, beings of darkness, light, and myth. It was a place of undeniable danger, but also of opportunities for those who knew where to look. And deep within this vast, eerie forest, amidst the unsettling quietness broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of owls or distant howl of wolves, a shadowy figure could be seen kneeling beside a small, murmuring stream. Just beside him lay a wounded animal, seemingly a horse at first glance, with fur as white as snow. Yet it bore one unique characteristic, a single horn protruding from its head, revealing it to be none other than a creature of myth and legend, a unicorn. And right now it was dying. Its body bore the marks of a destructive impact to the back, a half-foot-wide wound gaping deeply. A silver-colored liquid, its blood, seeped steadily into the damp earth, while its chest heaved heavily, each labored breath barely audible as it struggled to draw in air. But it seemed this was not the day for it to take that final breath, as the cloaked figure kneeling beside it had taken action after retrieving something with a tap on the ring on his finger. It was a paste or salve, possibly a healing remedy, and the figure carefully applied it to the creature's wounds while chanting in an unknown language. Moments later, a faint glow spread over the beast's terrible wound, and, at a speed visible to the naked eye, the torn flesh of the beast slowly began to knit itself back together. Finally, the silvery blood which had been streaming gradually came to a stop. Not far from the small stream, hidden behind thick trees, a pair of sharp eyes had been watching everything from the shadows. It was another creature of magical origin, a centaur, and a resident of this very forest. The eeriness here was nothing unusual to it, but during a habitual stroll tonight, it had heard the pained cry of a creature, one very familiar, and under its kind's protection. So, without hesitation, it had rushed toward the source of the cry, only to find itself forced to hide, unable to intervene. After all, after witnessing the brief confrontation, if it could even be called that, and piecing together what it could from their conversation, it had quickly realized this was not a situation within its power to interfere with. Two mysterious wizards, one, the wraith of a dark lord, a lingering remnant of evil, the other, even more terrifying, an archmagus hiding their face. It didn't take a genius to realize that neither wanted to be seen, and if it were discovered, it would be no match for either of them. So it watched, even after the wraith-infected wizard had fled, even as the other figure tended to the wounded unicorn. It still did not dare to step forward. It did not dare risk its life trying to determine whether this mysterious figure was a friend or foe. Instead, it planned to take the matter to its leader as soon as the figure left, perhaps even involve the school's residing archmagus. However, in the next moment, that deep, distorted voice spoke. It was so clear, so close, it felt as if the words had come from right beside its ear. "You can come out now, Centaur." It was so sudden that it instinctively shifted to the opposite side and looked around, only to find nothing. Then, as its gaze returned to the stream, it saw him now standing, staring directly at it with those crimson eyes that seemed to pierce straight into its soul. A tense silence followed. Only then did the centaur fully grasp that it had been discovered. Without a second thought, it gathered all its strength and prepared to bolt. No, this was no kind wizard. What kind of kind wizard had eyes as red as blood? What kind of kind wizard could make it feel so small with just a glance? But before it could even turn, before its powerful legs could even take a step, it felt something. A weight, an invisible force crashed down upon it, pressing into its very being. It was as if the air itself had turned to stone, heavier than anything it had ever known. How heavy did something have to be to render its six-limbed body completely motionless, not even able to flinch? It did not know. What it did know was that this was a being standing at the very peak of power, a presence that could not be challenged. The last time it had felt this insignificant was when its leader had once attempted to threaten Hogwarts' overseer, warning him and his students not to trespass into the forest. That day, every single one of its kind had understood what it meant to stand before absolute power. And now, for the second time, it felt it, that suffocating pressure, the unmistakable sensation of its own will being dominated. As far as it knew, only the archmagus among human wizards possessed such a presence. Its earlier assumption had been correct. This was another king, Lord Wizard King, I did not mean to offend. It stammered, struggling to hold onto its own thoughts, which felt as though they were being squeezed from all directions. This is my home. I was only passing. But then, its words caught in its throat, because it saw the impossible. The unicorn, so gravely wounded that it had believed no amount of magic could save it, slowly, shakily, rose to its feet. The wound was barely visible now, nothing but a crimson scar. Its large, luminous eyes carried exhaustion. But beyond that, there was something else. Something the centaur had never expected to see. Trust. The unicorn, a creature that did not seek the company of other sentient beings. 1 second only to a Chilan in its ability to sense the purest of hearts. Took a slow, deliberate step forward. Then another. And then, despite its weariness, it gently rubbed its milk-silver coat against the shadowy figure's legs. Affection. Gratitude. Even if this wizard had somehow miraculously saved it, even if it had been pulled from the very brink of death, the centaur knew, a unicorn would never act this way unless it sensed true goodness. Had it been wrong? Was this figure, who looked like a demon, truly a saint in disguise? Maverick looked down, bewildered, at the majestic creature rubbing against his legs like an affectionate puppy. To be honest, he had only saved it on a gut feeling, not expecting anything in return, much less this. After tending to its wounds and using up some of his most precious medicinal ingredients, his plan had been to kindly ask the centaur to keep what had happened here a secret, then leave. He hadn't intended to wait for the unicorn to recover, let alone receive gratitude he hadn't even known they could express. And yet, here it was, nuzzling against him like a loyal companion. The strangest part, however, was because this was a unicorn. Every book he had ever read suggested unicorns were second only to Chilans in purity, creatures that instinctively avoided those with even a sliver of corruption in their hearts. So why was this one acting this way toward him? Surely it didn't think he was pure-hearted? Unfortunately, unicorns couldn't speak. Under the watchful gazes of both centaur and wizard, the unicorn affectionately rubbed against his legs a few more times before, with a slight limp, disappearing into the depths of the forest. Weird. Maverick pushed the strange thoughts aside and turned his attention back to the centaur. Their eyes met, and Maverick could see that the centaur's earlier wariness had now changed into fanatic. "Speak your name, centaur," he said, adopting the tone of Bloodraven. "It is Nebulin, great king." The centaur lowered his head in what seemed like submission. "I apologize for doubting your majesty earlier. Had I known, I would not have acted so disrespectfully." The crimson eyes narrowed at the centaur. Doubting what exactly? His tone remained even, though inwardly, he grew more puzzled with each word this horseman spoke. Nebulin looked almost ashamed. "That you might be an evil wizard. But after witnessing the unicorn perform the blessing ritual, I feel ashamed for even entertaining such blasphemous thoughts." "Blessing ritual?" Nebulin nodded and explained without a beat. "The unicorns in the Forbidden Forest are under our protection, so we know much about them. Ancient knowledge. It is said that if a unicorn shows affection 3 times in a row to a being, like it did with you, rubbing its head against you exactly 3 times, then that person is safe from all soul and spirit-related curses, for as long as that unicorn shall live. Any curse you may carry will be passed on to the unicorn itself and negated. It's common knowledge that unicorns are immune to all curses." The shadowy figure's crimson eyes narrowed, its gaze fixed on the centaur as Maverick racked his memory for things related to unicorns he had read. But nothing came to mind. In a normal world, he might have laughed it off, but this was the world of magic, where curses were all too real and could be incredibly dangerous. However, this didn't sound like a bad thing. In fact, it sounded rather favorable to him. His curiosity piqued. Maverick turned his gaze to the submissive-looking horseman. "What do you mean unicorns are immune to all curses?" Nebulin's voice was excited as he explained. "It's exactly as it sounds, great king. All soul and spirit curses are ineffective against the pure spirit of unicorns." He paused, thinking the figure in front was concerned about the unicorn. "So you need not worry. Any curse passed onto the unicorn will be cancelled. Ineffective, you are truly blessed. We, even the tribe that protects these majestic creatures, have never received such a blessing. And today, I am truly honored to witness it myself." Listening to the centaur speak with such passion and belief on the matter made Maverick consider whether he should study magical creatures more seriously. Perhaps he could ask Newt for some materials, he thought, but that could wait. Right now, he was late for a meeting, and this unexpected encounter with Coral and the unicorn had already taken longer than expected. He looked at the centaur, and Nebulan saw those unsettling crimson eyes narrow at him. What has happened here? I don't want another soul knowing about it. Do you understand? The centaur responded immediately without hesitation. Yes, great king. I will keep this secret. You have my word. Maverick observed the centaur's emotions carefully for any flicker of deceit or hesitation. There was none. No sign of dishonesty, no trace of guilt or evasion. Still, words were only words. I need your oath. Bind it with your magic, he added just in case. Nebulan's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly realized this was to be expected. After all, he and this shadowy figure, whose name he didn't even know, were strangers. Even if he now believed this figure to be a kind wizard after witnessing the unicorn's actions, that didn't mean the wizard felt the same way about him. So, after carefully considering it, he did not hesitate. He raised his hand and spoke the magic that would bind him. I swear, by my spirit and by the ancient bonds of my people, I will keep this secret as you command. May the stars bear witness to my word. Maverick felt the change in magic settle and knew the oath had taken effect. Satisfied, he turned away without another word. With a slight motion of his hand, the space around him trembled. Then, as if reality itself had cracked, a dark rift split open before him. Nebulan's breath caught in his throat. His kind had many records of human wizards and the forms of magic they wielded. And this was another confirmation of his assumption. As he stared in disbelief, the shadowy figure stepped forward, weightlessly floating into the tear in space. And then, just as smoothly as it had appeared, the rift closed, swallowing him whole.